Daf Yomi Tractate Bava, page 37a, part 2 rather, towards the bottom of the Amud, with the words Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi said, "Come and hear a proof for his Vid's opinion from the Mishnah. The sages said before Rabbi Yehuda, what would be the halacha if this ox is forewarned with regard to Shabbos, for Sabbaths, but is not forewarned with regard to weekdays?" He said to them, for damage it causes on Shabbos, the owner pays full cost of damage, and for damage it causes on weekdays, he pays half the cost of the damage. Granted, if you say that the Mishnah teaches, but was not forewarned with regard to weekdays, they were asking him about the halacha in that case, and likewise, he was answering them with a ruling. But if you say that it teaches this ox that is forewarned with regard to Sabbaths is not forewarned with regard to weekdays, the Mishnah would be understood as saying that an ox that is forewarned with regard to Shabbat is not considered forewarned with regard to weekdays. Is it possible that the sages were teaching him this halacha? And furthermore, what was he responding to them? They had already stated themselves that the ox is not considered forewarned with regard to weekdays. Rav Yanai said Rav Zvid's opinion can be inferred from the former clause of the Mishnah as well, as it teaches if the ox gores an animal or person with regard to which it is forewarned, its owner pays the full cost of the damage, and if it gores an animal or person with regard to which it is not forewarned, he pays half the cost of the damage. Granted, if you say that the Mishnah teaches in the first clause with regard to an ox that is forewarned with regard to its own species, but is not forewarned with regard to other species, this clause is explaining the halacha in that case. In other words, if the ox is forewarned only with regard to its species, its owner is liable to pay the full cost of the damage, only if it gores another ox. But if you say that the Mishnah teaches that an ox is forewarned with regard to its own species, is not forewarned with regard to other species, and the halacha was already determined at the beginning of the Mishnah, namely that the ox is not considered forewarned with regard to other species, then what need is there for the Mishnah to further state if the ox gores an animal or person with regard to which it is forewarned? Its owner pays the full cost of the damage, and if it gores an animal or person with regard to which it is not forewarned, he pays half the cost of the damage. Has the Mishnah not taught us until now that for an innocuous ox its owner pays half the cost of the damage, and for a forewarned ox he pays the full cost of the damage? The Gemara comments, and even if you say that Rav Papa's opinion, which says that an ox that is forewarned with regard to its own species is not considered forewarned with regard to other species, is accepted, nevertheless, if an ox gored an ox, a donkey, and a camel, it is thereby rendered forewarned with regard to all of them. The ox is rendered forewarned with regard to all three species, regardless of the fact that it did not gore each individual species 3 times. The sages taught if an ox saw an ox and gored it, and subsequently saw another ox but did not gore it, again saw an ox and gored it, and then saw an ox but did not gore it, and the third time saw an ox and gored it, and saw an ox and did not gore it, in this case it rendered forewarned with regard to alternate oxen. The ox is considered forewarned with regard to goring every other ox that it sees, and is considered innocuous with regard to the oxen in between. If it then gores 2 oxen in a row, the owner of the ox is liable for only half the cost of the damage for the second ox. The sages taught if an ox saw an ox and gored it, and then saw a donkey but did not gore it, and saw a horse and gored it, and then saw a camel and did not gore it, and saw a mule and gored it, and then saw a wild donkey and did not gore it, in this case it is rendered forewarned with regard to alternate animals of all species. Iboilohu Nagach. A dilemma was raised before the sages. If an ox gored